If you are someone in the market looking for a house right now, perhaps this has been an experience that you've had recently.
Thank you for calling Zillow. How can I help you?
Yes, how you doing? I'm looking into purchasing a 3-bedroom house.
Alrighty, what's your budget?
$300,000.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Horrible inflation advice.
Yeah, Brian, I'm really excited to talk about this. We've talked about inflation a little bit recently, but it seems like the more headlines that it grabs, the more people are out there trying to share, oh no, this is what you need to do, or this is what's going on, or this is, fill in the blank. And again, one of the things we want to help do for our financial mutants out there, the audience, is sift through some of the craziness, sift through all the misinformation that might be out there.
Yeah, I mean, things are happening fast right now. I mean, just think about it. I feel like we're almost having to do inflation content every month or two just because the data is changing rapidly. And this is also top of mind. I mean, you think about Nate Silver, who's kind of the big pollster out there. He does not only politics, but he does sports. He does, current events and everything else to let us know what is going on and what is on top of mind for most people out there. And you would think with the Ukraine war that's going on, you would think with COVID-19, what's the most important thing going on? According to Nate Silver, it's inflation.
It's inflation. It's the number one thing that people are concerned about. It's the number one thing that people are searching for. It's the number one thing people say is their greatest concern right now. So it must be something pretty important that we ought to talk about.
So we wanted to shine a light on something. You kind of already alluded to this. We wanted to shine a light on some of the bad advice. But I want to go deeper. I was driving to work this morning thinking about, man, what do I want people to get out of this inflation show? And the big thing was, I need you guys, we talk about being financial mutants all the time. I want you to have the inflation vision to where you can see the contrarian risk or opportunity that's created by these unique times.
So let's kind of start at the beginning and let's talk about what causes inflation. And then we'll dive a little bit into what inflation is. But before we talk about what causes it, we have to kind of define it. And so let's look out to the interwebs to see if we can have someone kind of help us understand what inflation is.
By the way, to set this up, this video was released in August of 2020. I feel like that's good context because you'll be like, why is this person stating these prices? August of 2020. Like I said, life is coming at us fast these days.
I paid $2.25 per gallon for gas. Isn't that
We
expensive?
all wish.
You don't really want to know what the price is going to be in 50 years, son.
Because of inflation?
I don't know.
Inflation occurs at 2 to 2.5% per year. So gas is actually $7 a gallon where I'm from.
$7? Well, what about things like milk and coffee then?
A gallon of milk, $11. Coffee, $6.70 a cup.
So is there anything I can do?
You wish. Expected inflation is actually healthy for the economy.
Okay.
We just gotta hope wages keep up with it. Wait, what was the price of your gas again?
So here, by the way, I'll talk with the shaky because that's what I guess he
did a pretty
projects
good old
as
shaky voice.
50 years in the future self is going to have a shakier voice. But it is interesting. He said gas prices were going to be up to $7 a gallon 50 years in the future in 2070. Man, I don't know if the flux capacitor got fired up or what, but it feels like we reached that a lot quicker than 2070 as he shared.
So what is, so obviously he kind of described what inflation is, right? If you look at the textbook definition, inflation is just the rate at which the price of goods and services rise. In his example, we talked about gasoline and the price of milk. It's just the general increase in prices over a period of time.
Yeah, but let's talk about actually what's going on now. What's actually causing inflation? Because I think we can make this much more digestible and understandable. The first thing is we were all cooped up during the pandemic. So we have held back demand, and now it's almost like we started a 100-yard dash, and we're all running and tripping over each other and everything else. So there is definitely increased demand, and the pandemic did not help by pinning that all up. Bo, there's also increased cash. I mean, if you think about all the stimulus from the government, low interest rates to borrow money, stimulus to business and individuals, it's put a lot, and I've even got more on this with the Federal Reserve coming up, but that's caused issues. And then don't forget supply chain, limited supply we've had because we shut down the country for, or slowed down and impeded some of the supply chain issues. It's still working its way through the system. So if you bring all this together, we've created the perfect recipe of more cash, more demand, limited supply. We have lots of pressures on inflation right now.
And so once again, because it is something that's so top of mind that it's right in front of us right now, a lot of people are asking the question, is inflation good or bad? Is it a positive or a negative? And depending on what articles you read or whose perspective you're looking into, it's really hard to discern. It's really hard to figure out, well, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? And you might find yourself in a similar situation to a friend of ours.
Butterfly in the sky.
I love this video.
I can go
It's got
twice
big
as
equations.
high. Take a look.
He's trying hard. He's trying to put it together.
I mean, everybody is trying to figure out, because by the way, and I don't know if it's because it's an election year, but it does feel like nobody can figure out, is inflation good or bad? We're actually going to give you the answer. But before, here's the thing. I think it all depends. So, Bo, put some color on this so people understand how do you determine if inflation's good or bad?
Yeah, the truth of the matter is it can kind of be both, right? Like we think about inflation on things like gasoline. Nobody gets excited about that. None of us are happy to be paying more at the pump. So you would say, okay, inflation's a bad thing. On the other side, when the value of our homes increase or when our wages increase or we get increases in pay, that type of inflation is a positive. So we start thinking, okay, maybe inflation is a good thing. Well, the real answer is overall, it depends on a measure of the good parts of inflation versus the bad parts of inflation. So are the things that I want to be increasing at a greater rate than the things I don't want to be increasing, like fixed expenses or variable expenses?
It's kind of like when you're setting up a math equation. It really depends upon what the divisor or the base that you're coming from. And wages seem to be a big part of it. And we found a tweet that kind of shows and brings this back into context. It says, by the way, is this too soon?
Is it too? I don't know. I hope it's not too soon.
We got a tweet here. It says, when you get a 5% raise, but remember inflation is 7.9%. And then, of course, we've got a before and after picture of Will Smith. So like I said, maybe a little too soon.
Maybe a little too soon. But I think a lot of people have found themselves in this position where they get excited about, oh, my pay went up or this thing changed, this improved. But then when you actually look at it, the cost of the things you need to buy or the purchasing power of your dollars is not as great as you thought it was. So you actually losing money.
That's how you can tell, guys, good versus bad purchasing power. So money coming into you versus money going out. Obviously, if you have more coming into you, that's a good thing. More going out and that purchasing power being eroded is a bad thing. So let's actually see what the data, and we even wanted to put some historical context on this. Last time we had high inflation, Bo, was late 70s, early 80s. What happened to wages versus inflation back then?
Yeah, so if we look at this period from 1972 to 1983, the last hyper high inflationary environment that we had, you can see that wages grew by an average of 9.9% per year, but inflation actually averaged a little over 12%. So over that, 11 years? Over that time period, the purchasing power of your dollar was decreasing. $1 was not keeping up with the cost of the things that you needed to buy. So it was a negative. You would say that inflation was harmful, at least in terms of purchasing power during that period.
Yeah, and I think historically, looking back, we definitely all, even the history books and everybody is like, yeah, definitely a negative thing. So fast forward me now to where we currently are in this market.
So if you look at when inflation started to ramp up right there in 2020, and we just measure inflation from 2020 through 2022, again, this is a much shorter time period, Since April of 2020, when it began accelerating, wages have grown by about 7% per year, but inflation has risen by about 11%. So again, we have this divide, we have this deficit where the real purchasing power of wages is not creeping up with the increase in the cost of goods. That's not a great thing. I think in net effect, that's why most Americans right now feel like they're getting a pay cut, even if their wages are going up, are increasing.
Yeah, now, in full disclosure, this is a little unfair is that we have such a small window of time
That's
here,
right.
2 years that we're looking at versus that 11-year period back historically. But without a doubt, seeing that close to 4% spread from inflation to where wages are, it's troubling. This is not positive for this to be going on. And I think we need to talk about now what is making this so unique. Why is this maybe different than in past? Because I think it also, how do you battle inflation?
Sure.
This is important for people to understand. The first tool that typically you'll see come out when you hit inflationary periods is you'll see interest rates go up rapidly. Now, we have shared that the Federal Reserve has raised rates 0.25% so far.
March,
That's a big change because we've been keeping rates pretty much at zero for years now. So this is a big change, and I expect there's going to be many more rate increases coming our way.
The problem is, I think that you can say we or you can say us. Interest rates staying low has felt like we've wanted to keep things happy. We wanted to keep things, we didn't want to introduce too much tumult into the economy. So it's like you've been at a party and, the stuff is still flowing. No one's been willing to do last call. No one's been willing to kind of end the party. And because of that, I'm worried that, we've gotten into a little bit historically where we could have combated inflation. Now we're going to have some issues trying to rein and reel that in.
You're being nice.
I am being kind.
We are drunk on low interest rates. I mean, think about how we've all gotten to the point where whenever anything bad happens in the world, we look over at the central bankers and go, hey, you go open up that bar again, because we need to keep those interest rates low.
Yep.
We need to keep it flowing. We have, and here's the problem with this. You've heard, I think it was Sir Richard Branson. I mean, he's the one that kind of gives the quote from, drinking alcohol is borrowing happiness for tomorrow. I do feel like you can make the same analogy. We're at this drunk, low interest party, and we are stealing some of that growth from tomorrow by the fact that we're not willing to make some of the hard decisions to address this.
And so the question is, why are we unwilling to make some of those hard decisions? Well, central bankers, it seems, are nervous to take action. And there's a number of reasons that this is the case. I mean, the first you kind of think about is like geopolitical volatility right now. What's kind of going on out there in the world around us is making central bankers nervous to adjust and change too many variables.
Yeah, I think it's that whole you break it, you buy it.
That's right.
Nobody wants to have the label that you're the one ending the party. I mean, it is what it is. And I think, you talked about geopolitical, but I showed up with a prop today. I feel like Carrot Top a little bit.
We literally bought you like this incredibly fancy, nice, advanced piece of technology to prevent you from bringing sheets onto the show, and we still couldn't shop you for
Old habits
sheets.
that hard. Plus, it sounds great when you can, you can rattle the paper on air. Think about the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. If you want to know how much money has been dropped into our economy, consider that in 2019, they listed assets and liabilities on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet at $3.9 trillion.
Okay,
that's big.
That's a big number,
right? Fast forward to September 29th of 2021, that $3.9 trillion has ballooned up to, or we could say exploded, to $8.4 trillion. That's money out there floating around. Wowzer.
Yeah, and so I don't think this is, this is obviously the Federal Reserve balance sheet that we're talking about, but this is not an isolated issue only to our country, only to our economy, only to what's going on in our country. If you kind of look around the world, we have a large portion of developed countries that are in sort of a unique spot. But again, if we're going to talk about where they are now, perhaps it makes sense to look at where they were historically. So Daniel put this together. This is from Statista. If you look at the debt to GDP ratio by country in 2011, so a little over 10 years ago, you can see that the US was at about 80% debt to GDP, France was at 88, and there were two countries that were above 100, Italy and Japan. Well, when we looked sort of at historical analysis, debt to GDP ratios greater than 77% for prolonged periods can lead to economic slowdowns. Now, we were talking a little bit in pre-show. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't mean that has to happen. I mean, obviously, we're going to show you in a second, the U.S. circumstances changed, but I would argue from 2011 until now, we haven't really seen an economic slowdown. We've seen quite the opposite. However, it does seem like maybe this cannot quite last forever, especially if we stay on the trajectory that we're on.
Well, here's the thing, and I've said this on the show, and this is why I love that we are doing advanced level training for all the financial mutants out there, because nobody else is sharing this stuff, the why behind inflation. I mean, to the point that we're showing slides of GDP compared to debt. Who does that? Financial mutants do it. And here's what I want you guys to understand, and this is what I think gives a lot of perspective. You can see we were pretty close to the healthy guideline of 77% back in 2011. We have changed.
That's right.
So show the number. You can see we have boosted up. We went from 80% to 120% of GDP. That's scary. The only reason that I think we feel so calm about things is we look around and go, everybody else is still at the party too. Nobody's leaving this drunken party that we're at. And you can see it doesn't matter. Any of the developed countries, all the central bankers are in unison of, really loading up those balance sheets and dumping a lot of money into the world supply. It's a little scary. This is kind of uncharted in a lot of aspects.
And it suggests that these the central banks and these large economies, they have an incentive to keep interest rates low for as long as they can. Obviously, you have a lot of debt. You want the interest on that debt to be as low as possible. It's easier to pay back. So perhaps there is some, I don't want to say strategy, that sounds a little more malicious, but perhaps there is some strategy around inflation as a mechanism to solve some of these debt woes. It's just seems to me like a dangerous game to be playing.
Oh, okay. I won't say it. I'm willing to go a little further, but I'm not willing to. I think the better thing to do is to pivot before I get myself in trouble with the central bankers. And let's talk about some of this crazy advice we're seeing come out on social media in light of these unique inflationary times that we're living in right now. So the first one is, this is a unique thing, Bo. It's that people are saying, are cars now an investment because I hear that they're appreciating in value? That's unique.
And you may be saying, no, we're financial mutants. Nobody's saying that. Au contraire, take a look at this.
Oh, watch this.
Everybody knows that most cars lose 25% of their value as soon as you drive them off the lot.
Agreed.
But today, that's no longer the case. This Lamborghini Urus retails brand new for $250,000. But because of a shortage in inventory, this same car, even with 30,000 kilometers on it, can go for $300,000. So flipping luxury cars has become the new craze. So people are actually making money when cars like these leave the lot in today's market. For more financial facts and tips, follow me on TikTok and Instagram.
That came pretty fast, Bo. So I want to summarize.
Yeah, please.
She's saying a brand new Lamborghini SUV is $250,000, but because we're in this crazy world right now, you can actually have a used, because she said that 30,000 miles, or
That's
I can't remember what it was.
She says kilometers, I think.
Kilometers. So, but she said a used Lamborghini is actually selling for over $300,000. First of all, this is a pet peeve of mine. You realize that Lamborghini SUV is built on the Audi. It's like a Q8. I think because every time I see one of those things, I'm always like, do they realize they just bought an Audi? I mean, it's just, for like 5 times the price that they could have gotten,
they could have gotten
an Audi.
the same car for
but it is. But guys, there is so much here to unpack because she's talking about maybe you should flip
You should start
luxury
flipping,
cars.
not just any car. You should start flipping luxury cars. And we're talking about things in like the $250,000 range. I mean, can you imagine, Brian, if one of our financial meets out there came with this idea, I'm going to start flipping luxury cars, how disastrously bad that could go and how quickly that could happen.
Yeah, I feel like context is always needed. The first thing you have to ask yourself is, do trees grow to heaven? I mean, that is I can't remember who said that. I know we had a business associate that threw that out to us. I think we all need to think about why, and I've said this on so many shows, when we talk about our 23-8 rule for buying cars, we say that vehicles are napalm to your financial life, and that's because they're just not good. So let's go through why cars are typically and historically horrible for your finances.
The first one she even alluded to, she even said this, that cars depreciate, new cars depreciate over time. She had threw out a number of 25% in year one. According to data from Edmunds, now this is not luxury cars, this is just on average, a car depreciates about, 19% in the first year. After 3 years, they will have lost 42% of their value. After 5 years, they've lost 60% of their value. So when you think about an asset that you buy, generally speaking, you want the value of the asset to increase. Cars are not that. They get less valuable over time. So I'm thinking about something where I want to think about making money and investing. That's the first giant red flag to me. They are depreciating. Even if they're not depreciating right now in this moment, that is a truth, a fact that likely is not going to change.
Well, there's several impacts here. There's supply chain issues that have kept the computer chips and things. And then you've also got all this glut of money that's been dumped into the economy that's created this demand that can't be matched with the current supply. This will not continue forever. Right. So don't get lost, because realize it's not only the depreciation. Cars cost money to own, whether we're talking about, by the way, insurance on a luxury car, not going to be cheap. The money to keep that car healthy, not going to be cheap. And then, the fuel costs. Heck, you better just hope it only takes premium. That car might take some type of special fuel that just because it's high, the engine is highly tuned. All that stuff costs you money. It's not like you just unload the money of buying the vehicle and then you're done and you can let the money come in. You have to just maintain this.
Let's look at some actual numbers. If we think about the total monthly cost of owning a car. So right now, if you look at the average auto loan payment in this country, it's about $609 a month.
And that's not a Lamborghini, by
that
the way.
Right there just kind of blows my mind a little bit, because I bet if you looked at the average monthly savings for the American household, it's probably not $609 a month.
But we're not done with just car payment. What else is there?
You have the payment, and then car insurance, $89 a month. If
that's not a Lamborghini
if
either.
You're not a young person, and if you don't have any driving record issues. Fuel with today's gas prices on average cost about $232 a month. And then maintenance, just to kind of keep the things, is about $100 a month. So the average American driver spends a little over $1,000 every month to own and drive a vehicle. That is an asset that has a lot of carry cost associated with it.
Well, it's not only carry costs, there's opportunity costs, Bo. I think everybody out there, go to moneyguy.com/resources, download our free deliverable on Money Multiplier. What is each dollar in your army of dollars worth in the future? Because if you're saving, instead of doing car payments of $1,000 a month, think about if you were saving and investing $1,000 a month, especially if you're in your 20s, 30s, even 40s. That is tremendous amounts of money in the long term. Don't fall into this financial trap.
Now, Brian, this next point is something we talked about, and this is why maybe cars are not the most fantastic investment opportunity. You are a little longer in the tooth, and I've heard you...
Now, come on. Now, you don't get out that easy, Bo, because what we're about to show, you were on this planet when this car was being made and manufactured and cutting edge. So you were long enough in the tooth, too. You just might have pooped inside of this thing. Keep going.
So you've counseled me a few times on cars. Hey, be careful on the car you buy, because technology that's super cool today might not be super cool in the future. It becomes obsolete, and it becomes obsolete rather quickly. And you said, hey guys, go find me a picture of an automobile. And Daniel Witten found a 1990 Cadillac Eldorado Touring. I got to believe this was a pretty fancy car.
It's a
back in the
ballin'
day.
vehicle back in the day. I mean, look at this thing. This is my point, is that this is cutting edge. And for those out there listening on the podcast, what you don't know, most of us know about speedometers, and then your tachometer for showing the RPMs of the engine and stuff. And what's funny is we went through a period forever, you're watching the needle to see how far it goes up. But for a small period of time, we got very excited about that digital LED, that blue hue that you could fill the entire, inside of your car with, where you could see the speedometer, you could do your temperature, everything. This thing was cutting edge in 1990. And yes, Bo was potty trained by this point, but he was still on the planet. And here's what I think. If you drove this car now, you're not. This ain't the dashboard of what a modern car looks like. It's obsolete at this point. So don't fall into the trap. And I even see that when you like SEMA. I go out to Vegas to SEMA because I got friends in the auto industry, and I'm always amazed if you go on eBay and type in SEMA vehicles from the past. You can see you can buy these cars that were worth a fortune when they were new, for much more affordable prices, because they get old too, and taste and trends change, and it loses its value.
Now, I want to give you I want to give you some kudos here, because we were kind of talking about, so obviously we sort of laid out all these reasons why cars are not like a sound investment in that aspect. But what she said is, hey, things are different. We're sort of in this new paradigm right now. We're in this time that's different. And you said, man, every time you hear that, every time you hear new paradigm or new normal or things are different, your spidey senses immediately kind of go off. It's something we say. And you were talking in show prep about how, look, what we're seeing right now with inflation, some stuff is stickier than other, and a financial mutant knows how to recognize that. Talk a little bit about what you were saying there.
Yeah, I mean, be careful of reversion to the mean, and the fact that, houses take a while to build. So, some of this, and we're going to cover housing in a minute, but you'll see some of those prices might be stickier. Vehicles, look, they're going to get the supply chains fixed. We're going to, money supply, as they raise interest rates, is going to start coming down. The system will equalize. And if you're thinking that we're in this new paradigm where cars don't lose value anymore, and you should even invest and do crazy schemes like buy luxury vehicles, you might find yourself holding the bag at the end of the day.
You're not setting yourself up for success. All right, so let's talk about another thing that another question people are asking that is very much related to what's going on in this inflationary environment. Because we know right here, this is something that's very, very close to home with our team here asking this question almost daily or weekly is, will home prices crash? Are we going to see a significant downturn in the value of homes because of what's going on with inflation?
We definitely have folks here that are rooting for this. So let's see if it's going to happen.
All right. So if you are in the market, this is something that Daniel and Nate brought to us. If you are someone in the market looking for a house right now, perhaps this has been an experience that you've had recently.
Thank you for calling Zillow. How can I help you?
Yes, how you doing? I'm looking into purchasing a 3-bedroom house.
Alrighty, what's your budget?
$300,000.
You would have gone with that too.
That's class, because it is just
it's
crazy.
So true. It's so true.
It's if you're not laughing, you're crying.
You're crying. That's exactly right.
That's the reality of the situation, is because housing is absolutely running from people right now. I'm sure we're not the only place in the country right now where it's anytime you get with neighbors, you're like, holy cow, did you hear what they're selling their house for this? They had 30 people make offers. I mean, it's just weird. No due diligence. We are in unique times with housing. So I think that there are people that are thinking, hey, this thing is going to potentially fall back to where it was in 2019. Once again, I think we need history to help ground us in what we can expect in this time that we're in right now, too.
Yeah, so if we look back again to the last major inflationary environment we saw back from 1972 to 1983, you can see that home prices rose by about 15.8% per year, and inflation averaged about 12.2% annually. But what you can see is even in those years where inflation kind of dropped or inflation kind of stayed low, there might have been some dips in the value of homes. There might have been some small opportunity there, but the value of homes kept going up. In that inflationary environment, homes continue to get more and more expensive. So I don't know that inflation in and of itself is going to be the thing that's going to immediately cause an opportunity or a crash in the price or the values of homes.
You said it right, is that the short term, there's going to be some fluctuations, but to have a crash where, houses are going to lose 20, 30, 40% of their value, because a lot of people go, wait a minute, houses do have crashes. You even, in show prep, we were talking about from 2009 to like 2012, the post-2008 Great Recession, housing prices did collapse.
They dropped, for sure.
But here's the thing. That was, once again, supply comes into play here. We had overbuilt in 2008 because of everybody was so excited about all the opportunity with housing that they created too many houses for not enough demand. We're in the exact opposite situation right now. The supply of houses is way down. And by the way, houses is not something that you crank up the engine and say, next week we need 20 more houses in this community. No, it takes months, if not with supply chain, years. Unfortunately, we're in unique times here to build more houses. So I'm telling you, yes, there's going to be price fluctuation, but don't count on a crash. This could be a little stickier. Now give them the perspective of what is going on in the housing marketplace now.
Yeah, so today looks similar but different. Again, if we look back in this was an 11-year period. If we look from April of 2020 until present day, until the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, home prices have risen by 26.5%, and inflation has risen by 11%. Again, some of this is driven by inflation, but most of it's driven by supply and demand. So if you are someone who's sitting there thinking, I'm just going to wait for the crash, I'm going to wait for the crash, I'm going to wait for the crash, I don't know that it's a given that home prices are going to necessarily crash. I think one of the things we might be hoping for is that the rate of increase might slow down so that folks trying to get into their first home or trying to get into their second home or whatever the thing may be have a little bit of time to catch up to the market. I think it's probably a more realistic scenario.
Now, I do want to give a little hope. That hockey stick is so steep.
It's big.
We might have a slight adjustment just because of how steep that upward trend is, but it ain't going to be a crash, I don't think. Just based upon historical context. So I would be, if you are a person that you're going to be in an area for the next 10, 15 years, and you have the ability to cover the cash flow, even with the elevated prices, pay attention to, what's going on out there and, understand your why so you can navigate these unique times.
And as a very brief and quick aside, if you are someone out there saying, well, this is depressing. The guys just told me there's not going to be a crash. I'm never going to be able to I'm trying to get to 20% down. Remember, we give you a little bit of grace when it comes to your first home purchase. Once you kind of know, point. I'm going to be in this place for the next 5, 7, 10 years. I am in the financial place and in the living circumstance where I've got some certainty around how much space I need. It's okay if you only put down 3.5%, 5%. You don't have to do 20% on that first home, so long as you make sure that you keep your housing costs within 25% of your gross income. The monthly carry does not need to exceed 25%. If you can do that, it's okay. So even though we're in a very unique real estate market, give yourself a little bit of grace and make the hard decisions now so that you can get on the right side of the housing market, but in a way that makes sense for where you are.
And this is probably one of the places that is going to be most sensitive to interest rates.
For sure.
Since we know rates are going up. I think mortgage rates alone have been impacted by close to 1% rather rapidly. You will see the market slow down potentially. I always had to put these disclaimer language in there. to interest rates. So pay attention to what's going on. You might be able to find that equilibrium so you can actually make some housing decisions coming up.
All right. So we've talked about some things that are happening with inflation as it relates to housing, as it relates to cars. Well, one of the things people want to say is, okay, I've got those things figured out. What are the other ways that I can protect myself? And again, if you're looking on social media, if you're reading articles, if you're staying in financial news, financial information, you may be hearing something like, hey, real estate or gold or Bitcoin. Those are the only ways to protect yourself against inflation. If you're not doing those things, boy, you're not going to be able to keep up. It's going to run away from you. I don't know that I completely agree with that assessment.
Well, yeah, let's look. First of all, real estate, most of us, if you already own a home, you already have some protection, the fact that you already own a house. But if you're thinking about buying real estate from an investment or an inflation hedge, this is a scary time to be thinking about that because of the purchase price is running away from us. There's all kind of concerns there. Plus, you got to have the deep enough pockets that cash flow wise, if you get squeezed, if markets do correct or we have recessions, you can cover no matter what comes your way. I think about gold and Bitcoin. Both of these have limited supply and they're supposed to be better at protecting against inflation. But these are also elements and assets that don't have innovation, don't have dividends, don't have rent income. When you buy them, they basically sit there, and the only way you make money is if somebody pays more than you paid, which in inflationary periods does have potential, but it's a little concerning. There has to be a better way, and that's why we always talk about the biggest inflation hedge that is so in front of your eyes, but people just don't cover it, is financial investments, just buying index funds. You'd be surprised buying into the progression, the innovation, the technology of our modern world might be a better long-term inflation hedge than just these traditional things that have been shared.
And so again, let's go back in time and let's look at the last inflationary period that we saw. If you look from 1978 to 1983, so we're kind of going to shrink that window down, you can see annual rates of inflation relative to returns of the S&P 500. So in 1978, for example, inflation was 7.5%, S&P made 6.4. 1979, inflation was a little over 11%, S&P made over 18.5%, so on and so forth. What we think is interesting is if you look through this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year period, $10,000 at the beginning of that period would need to have $16,000 at the end of that period to have the same purchasing power, to maintain that. Well, if you would have taken that $10,000 and just invested in the S&P 500 at the end of that 6-year period, you'd have $24,000. So not only did you maintain your purchasing power, you actually improved your purchasing power over that time. This shows us that certainly during a small window of an inflationary time, equities or companies or financial investments, ownership in companies is and has been a great hedge against inflation.
But Bo, you just said it. That's 6 years. That's a high inflation period historically. What's the rest of the story if you expand this period even longer?
So if you look from 1978 all the way through the end of last year, 2021, inflation has averaged about 3.5% per year, but the S&P 500 has returned 12.4% annually. There are two really big takeaways that I would take from that. The first one is we just showed you from 1978 until 1983, inflation averaged double digits. But when you stretch it out over the longer term, reversion to the mean does take place, and we've seen a 3.5% average inflation rate. So just know that this too shall pass. We don't know what inflation is going to be over the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years, but over the long term, we can say that it's fairly comfortable and confident that it's going to revert somewhere close to the mean. Even in that context, returns on the S&P 500 have been incredibly healthy, 12% annualized over that, 40-ish years or so. It has been a great way to not only protect the purchasing power of your dollars, but actually improve the purchasing power of your dollars through time.
So this is the part, remember the car ride into work this morning? I was thinking about, man, I really want to make sure that I hone in on that financial mutant mindset, or how do you have that inflation vision? And I was like, how do you spot the risk and opportunities? And I want to go a little deeper to kind of close this out, Bo. First of all, let's talk about assets. You know, the big thing, and we talk about this on so much of our content, is making sure you understand the why when you make decisions, that they align with your goals, where you're trying to take your financial life. All that is so important that you got to have it tied down. And then how do they hold up in these unique times? Because it is interesting. Stocks, as you just covered, they do very well during inflationary periods, but it's also important for financial mutants to understand, well, what's other things, other assets I might own? We know real estate does well in these times, but bonds, because of rising interest rates to battle inflation, they might struggle a little bit. They're going to sputter and have a hard time getting traction. Know that going in so you can, like you said, no risk, but opportunity. But pivot that now, and I wanted to leave this for you, Bo. Talk to us about debt. I talked about the asset side of this, but let's talk about debt. How does, during inflationary periods, how do you think about debt a little differently?
Yeah, so one of the really unique things is that if you are a debt carrier, a debt holder, a debt owner, as inflation happens, it actually makes the value of that fixed debt decrease. It's easier to pay back debt as inflation happens, so certainly if you have a fixed rate. So if you're someone who has a mortgage, I don't know, at 2.5%, 3.5%, and we are entering into an inflationary environment, and you've been on this track where you're trying to get debt free and you're trying to pay off the house, perhaps you ought to think about, is paying off my house, is that the best way for me to approach protecting myself from inflation? Or based on my age and income and life circumstance, might there be a better way for me to still accomplish that goal, but accomplish it through a different means moving forward?
Yeah, and then I was even thinking about in terms of like your buying decisions, because so much of this inflation shows, because like housing purchases, I think a good exercise for anybody that's trying to make that decision of if I'm buying a house, debt, that's an asset, buying the real estate, but there's also usually a debt component that comes with it. I want you to understand there's some relationship between the housing purchase price to also where interest rates are. So when you're making this decision, I want you to run your analysis with your mortgage at 3.5%, 5%,
That's great.
and 6.5%, because, and then you can put on the buying power of the house. Yeah, maybe there's going to be a 10% flux on the purchase price to the low, to the high, just because we are in this unique inflationary period. But I think you're going to be shocked to see the more interest rates go up, the more affordability of that house goes down. So a lot of you are saying, well, man, if anything, that means, yeah, housing prices, they kind of can be justified because of the low interest rates. But that's where I get, whoa, danger, Will Robinson, because this is, I don't want you thinking leverage. This is the intoxication that comes from leverage, because people, I can already see it in the comments. You're probably like, let's just go take a bunch of loans. Let's go buy houses. Let's go buy some investments in the S&P 500. What could go wrong is that leveraged growth, and that's what we're talking about when you're doing mortgages. That's what we're talking about when you do margin loans and other type of investment loans to go buy those leveraged assets. Don't lose track of the risk.
And there is a difference in a good, well, sound, thought out plan and getting yourself way out ahead of your skis. Like you just heard us say, bonds are an interesting thing in a rising rate inflationary environment. Does that mean that we are proponents of designing portfolios with no bonds in it? Absolutely not. We think you have to think about them differently, and you have to look at different areas of the market to make sure that you have a portfolio that is well structured. It doesn't put you too far out on the risk spectrum, but takes into account that rates are likely going to rise. Because yields on savings and checking accounts are so low right now, does that mean you shouldn't hold any cash or any emergency reserves because you're going to lose money to inflation? Absolutely not. Yeah. Those things are there for a very specific purpose. And you should have a good plan before inflation starts. You should have a good plan during a hyperinflationary period. And your plan should remain good even after that inflationary period has passed. If you're trying to move and maneuver and time it, I worry that the markets and the economy can be incredibly unpredictable, and you're setting yourself up for a fool's errand to try to time it just right.
And that's why it's so important to have a balanced approach. I don't want you getting caught swimming naked.
That's right.
And that's what happens if you use debt the wrong way. We've tried to give you all the building blocks of seeing through the madness that's out there in social media, but also having that inflation vision that a financial mutant has, where you can see that risk, you can see that opportunity. If you haven't, I have to encourage you, go use our free resources. We are trying to load you up and fulfill the abundance cycle where you too will know how to navigate all these unique things. So go to moneyguy.com/resources. We have tons of free stuff to help you stay focused in these unique times on why you should be investing. And I know if you keep hanging out with us, you're going to be so successful that you'll learn, apply these concepts. You're going to reach a point that you're complicated. You can try to keep your life as simple as possible, but success will create complication. And you're going to need a co-pilot to tell you how to navigate those decisions. We will be there. Go reach out to us. You can go to moneyguy.com. You can go to aboundwealth.com. We have a work with us page. We will be that co-pilot when we're ready to take the relationship to the next level. I'm your host, Brian Preston. Mr. Bo Hansen, Money Guy team, out.